Hello and welcome everyone. This report is presented by Team 39, and we will gladly wander through it and watch closely how Japanese people managed to go through a fair amount of chaos and disasters throughout its history. How residents on this land keep holding on to it and to each other to adapt and handle the situation their own land put them through, and how the government itself adopted this idea and made it the official way to deal with the natural disasters they face. Geographically, Japan is surrounded by four main plates, which are Pacific Plate, Philippine Plate, Eurasian Plate, and North American Plate. This led Japan to face many climate changes resulting more natural disasters like earthquakes, conflagrations, fires, typhoons, and many more. As chaotic as it seems, the Japanese chose to look at that from another perspective, to watch and learn instead of crying over spilled milk. The first thing we're talking about today is the history of natural disasters in Japan. It is known that Japan has a history with natural disasters, one of them being earthquakes. Major earthquakes occurred in Japan, which led to many deaths and material losses. The most major one was the Great Kanto earthquake that happened in 1923. Many hundreds of thousands of houses were either shaken down or burned by the fire that occurred due to the earthquake. Because of that, the Japanese building code has required structural calculations considering the seismic force. And also, any wooden building that had 3 or more stories was required to have wooden braces. And they didn't stop at that. In 1981, they revised seismic codes featuring two-phase seismic design for earthquakes. The working stress had to be lower than the allowable stress to protect buildings. For medium-scale earthquakes, it wouldn't be damaged, but for the large-scale earthquakes, it just wouldn't collapse.
We will explain factors that determine the impact of the earthquake on the number of victims and economic losses. The first factor, earthquake intensity. The intensity is a number describing the severity of an earthquake in terms of its effects on the Earth's surface and on humans and their structures. Several scales exist, but Japan has UQ seismic scale called Shendo that measured the degree of shaking in the event of an earthquake. This set of number ranking from 0 to 7 is different from an earthquake's magnitude, which is a numerical value reflecting the size or energy of the temper at its source. The second factor, earthquake duration, which means how long does the earthquake last, which leads to more losses of lives and materials. And it doesn't stop here. World Health Organization studied that it also affects the mental health of people experiencing it, causing traumas of losing their families' lives, their homes, or even their own life. The longer the earthquake lasts, the worse the outcome. The third factor, preparedness of this disaster, which we will go through it later in the presentation and get to know how did the resistance prepare themselves to face this disaster, and how did the government develop solutions and building codes to make sure people can survive it. The final factor, tsunami earthquake. In seismology, a tsunami earthquake is an earthquake which triggers a tsunami of greater magnitude. They are particularly dangerous as a large tsunami may arrive at a coastline with little or no warning. This type of earthquake is massive, and the earthquake cannot trigger a tsunami except if it was above 5, which is considered a major earthquake where people can't move, or even worse, they are thrown away by the effect of this earthquake. Three of these factors that the person cannot do anything about, but the third factor is what the person can develop and reduce its damage. A person cannot permanently and the damage of the earthquake, but he was able to greatly reduce the effects caused by the earthquake, especially the death rate. The next graph shows that the effects of good disaster preparedness for disaster on the number of victims through years, and this is the only factor that a person can affect, where we can clearly see that through years of Japan's people learning how to protect themselves, the number of deaths decreased remarkably. Earthquake also caused the fire, which bringing us to the next disaster. First fire in Japan were in Edo, Tokyo's former name. During the Edo period, Edo was known as a city of fires in the modern days due to its many fires. As for the biggest reason for conflagrations, Japan's architecture has always been in wood, so a small flame can lead to a big issue. For example, Miraki City burned for 3 days due to typhoon winds, and 107,000 people died, and wooden houses were no help in one. Many of the disasters of the Great Kanto earthquake were caused by fires that were not prevented by wooden houses.
Residents surviving. After studying the history of these disasters, we might want how the residents try to adapt themselves. They actually give an amazing example in facing disasters that might take their life away. Take a look at this. During earthquake, they prepared survival kits. They may differ from house to another or from area to another, but they always should contain main things like first aid, bottled water, gloves, face mask, and of course you can pick whatever necessary supplies you need. They also made awareness and education in disasters prevention lesson in school. They hold usually emergency training so that kids at very young are well aware of how to act wisely and in a good safe way to survive it. For example, when they indoor, they should be hide under the table to prevent their head being hit by anything. Lately, by the appearance of phones, Japan had developed the mobile application that gets update whenever an earthquake or a tsunami break. It goes from 5 to 10 seconds before it, so that users can protect themselves as they were educated at school.
Fire protection helicopters. Fire protection helicopters help in many ways during a conflagration or any natural disasters. Fighting forest fire from the air and emergency transport of critically injured patients. Their usage increases yearly. With high maneuverability, helicopters are effective in cases if building close. Roads caved infessedly were destroyed, and transportation. Methods have stopped fanching after a large-scale conflagration. Volunteer fire corps. Volunteer fire corps are present in every town and city, showing an outstanding work, mobilization and response capabilities. Each member of the volunteer fire corps has his own job, but they are active day or night to protect their town by themselves, believing and the spirit of devotion to their homeland. While the firefighting activities are due, they are here to protect their lives, vehicles, vehicles, beings, and their properties from natural disasters such as earthquakes, winds, water damage, and mainly, of course, conflagration. By warning, butter, butter laws, butter rolls, and guiding through evacuation process. Even in cases of no disasters in sight, volunteer fire corps organize many social activities designed especially to improve fire and disaster prevention capabilities and even supporting their local community. Female volunteer and fire corps take part in air, That's or that's are or were more female related, including visiting people, homes early for fire prevention and driven, fire prevention lessons at kindergarten and many levels at school.
Japan have experienced many different natural disasters such as earthquakes and fires. They tried to set restrictions and laws and regulations to protect the residents and buildings in the country from the danger of disasters. That's why building standard law is one of the most important building codes reference for engineers of all fields. To face earthquakes, there can be many ways to face earthquakes and lower the damages that may occur from an earthquake, and this can be achieved by modifying the design of the building and make it suitable for earthquake resistance. Structural building consists of concrete columns that carry concrete beams above them that bear the weight of concrete ceiling. This type has a good earthquake resistance if it is designed and implemented accurately. Code was divided into three main sections: short-heighted building and it shouldn't exceed 6 or 7 floors, medium-heighted building and it shouldn't exceed 14 or 15 floors, high-rise building and it shouldn't exceed 30 floors.
Story drift angle. This is to make sure that during a medium force earthquake, the horizontal deformation in each story is within the scope. There is no external components become detached and fall from the building. In principle, within 1/200 or 1/120 in cases where there is no fear of significant damage. Stiffness and eccentricity ratio. Calculating this ratios confirms that the building's balance is within the scope and structural weaknesses will occur.
We all know that Japan was famous for its wooden building for many decades. It was a traditional style for a building to be from wood. That's why it was very easy for a fire to spread quickly. Also, Japan has a lot of climate characteristics as dry air in winter, strong winds, and phone phenomenon, which mean highest rate of fires and conflagration. That's why the first tool code to face conflagration is prevention of the spread of fire in the adjacent building. The Japanese government aim to control these fires both internally and externally. First, internally, by using non-combustible material to cover the walls and stairs as flame retardant gypsum board to prevent the fire from spreading inside the building, as in the picture. Second, externally, by using non-combustible materials to cover the external walls and roof to prevent the fire from spreading in the adjacent buildings and with least possible losses.
The second code is evacuation in buildings in safest ways possible. By using evacuation and escape facilities such as escape floors, stairs, and ladders. The first way is internally and through stairs or direct stairs. From upper floors or from the basement, evacuation occurs through stairs till the evacuation floor that have exits. And in larger buildings, they have more than one evacuation floor for emergencies, for faster evacuation, or if one of them wasn't working. The second way is externally and through escape stairs and special escape stairs. Circumstances may not help in evacuation through direct stairs. It may not be safe enough to take the stairs. So, buildings, especially high-rise buildings and buildings with basements, must have escape stairs for safer performance against fires and smoke, more than direct stairs. At the end of our presentation, we want to conclude that Japan had went through lots of disasters. Even their geographical location was no aid, but they still managed to be one of the greatest nations in the world. No matter how the situation got worse, their motto and what kept them going is that they wanted to save every single life. This should be a great lesson for us as engineers. Our job is to facilitate lives, build a brighter world for us and for next generations, to leave our traces so they can learn from it and develop from that, as we once did from our former ancestors, who were also thinking of us while working hard on their projects and discoveries. It is indeed a great lesson to stand upon, admire, think of, and learn from. This lesson that Japan had and still is given us humbly. And thank you for listening to us.